is this, okay? There is a, I'm going to call it a rural myth, not an urban myth, a rural myth that is pervading a lot of the arguments here. The rural myth is that because there was incredible distrust of tyranny on the part of the government, the Second Amendment was passed so that armed citizens will be the last bulwark against tyranny of the government. Now, it is true that there was concern about the effect of a standing army, and I'd say that concern pervaded everywhere. But the tyranny of the government leading to the implementation of militias is simply false. And the falsity is from what I just read you. I mean, it's absolutely plain on its face. Article 1, Section 8 says Congress shall have the power to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. The whole point of the militia, right, is to in fact defend the state, okay? Suppress insurrections. And I'll stop at the end of this, but there's another part of our past that we don't talk about because it just doesn't come up anymore, but it's a big point. Suppress insurrections. This was not a mythical worry. Suppress insurrections in the first 70 years, 80 years of the country was about slave insurrections, okay? And the worry was that, gee, the federal government, the Congress, wouldn't have the commitment to deal with the southern states' fear, terror, of slave insurrections. And slave insurrections are more than just slaves. It's free Negroes, it's John Brown, it's people who were abolitionists and militant abolitionists, and their fear was not misplaced. There were slave insurrections. And the militia, defined as white males, and in the government's brief, one of the jarring first sentences is, Paul Clement says the militia were white males. The white males were called upon to be available to help suppress slave insurrections. Okay? Not something we're worrying about today, but I'm just saying that the context in which all of this comes up, why do we have a Second Amendment? It's to make it clear that the Congress can't extinguish the militias. Why do we have militias? To, in fact, defend the government. Okay? And so there is an obligation to be available to be in a militia, but it's a well-regulated militia there to help suppress insurrections. And the insurrections that were out there that in fact were happening, in South Carolina, they were called out. They were called out all across the South to suppress slave insurrections. And the final irony, of course, is that when we get to the real joining of the issue about slavery, in fact, the states don't rely on their militias. They secede and form armies to fight the federal government's army. And that's the end of the militias. We essentially don't have anything that would be described functionally as a militia after the Civil War at all. In that context, and I think that is the context, I think it is really, really difficult to see the Second Amendment as doing anything other than saying states may have militias so that the federal government cannot extinguish them. There is an obligation to be available for a militia, and the purpose for the militia, which is to suppress insurrections, has simply been yanked out of our need and necessity.
Dave, I think John set you up to have a fight over what every one of those words means.